Welcome back to Bookish Dives. For those of you just joining us, welcome. We love taking these deep dives into fascinating books, and we're so glad you're here.
It's great to be here.
You know the drill. We like to take these really complex, thought-provoking books and pull out those key insights and aha moments so you don't have to wade through hundreds of pages yourself.
Right. A shortcut to being well-informed, that's what we aim for.
Exactly. So today we're diving into Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illnesses.
Ah, yes. This one's a big one. Really gets you thinking. Haidt, of course, you might know him from his other books like The Happiness Hypothesis and The Coddling of the American Mind. So he's no stranger to tackling these big societal issues.
Absolutely. And in The Anxious Generation, he really takes on this huge shift in how kids are growing up in the digital age. He connects it to this, well, pretty alarming rise in anxiety and depression among young people, especially Gen Z.
Yeah, those born around 1996 and later, right? They're the ones really feeling the impact of this so-called great rewiring of childhood that Haidt talks about.
Right. It's almost like, as he puts it, they're growing up on Mars because their environment is so fundamentally different from previous generations. Think about it. The shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood, it's drastic.
And it happened so quickly, too. It started subtly in the late 80s, but then really accelerated in the 2010s when smartphones became ubiquitous.
It's like the world changed overnight for these kids. He actually starts the book with this really interesting thought experiment. He asks the reader to imagine choosing to send their child to a Mars colony.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Yeah, and he's saying the unknown risks of sending your child to Mars are kind of like the uncharted territory of this digital upbringing. We just don't know the long-term consequences yet.
It's a powerful analogy. And that's what Haidt is trying to unpack, right? The potential consequences of this huge shift in childhood. He argues that this rewiring, this move to a phone-based childhood, coupled with this increase in overprotection in the real world, kids not being allowed to roam freely as much.
Right, like the helicopter parenting we hear so much about.
Exactly. He argues that combination has really changed how kids develop, and not necessarily for the better.
It's like these two forces, the digital world and the lack of real-world independence, they're working together to shape this anxious generation. So whether you're a parent, an educator, or just someone who wants to understand what's going on with young people today, this deep dive is for you. We're going to unpack Haidt's main arguments, look at some of the data he presents, and hopefully give you some food for thought.
Yeah, I'm ready to dive in. Let's get to the heart of it. What's the core of Haidt's argument here?
Well, he starts by highlighting this major turning point, this shift that happened in the late 1980s. It's when we transition from what he calls a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood.
Okay, so not an overnight change, but definitely a significant one that sort of cemented itself by the mid-2010s.
Right, when smartphones became almost like an extra limb for teenagers. So let's break that down a bit. What does he actually mean by play-based versus phone-based? What are the fundamental differences in how kids experience childhood in these two models?
So when Haidt talks about a play-based childhood, he's really talking about a childhood where free, unstructured play in the real world is the dominant mode of being. Think back a generation or two ago, kids were outside roaming the neighborhood, making up their own games, taking those little risks without constant adult supervision.
I remember those days. Building forts in the woods, riding bikes until the streetlights came on. It's funny how that's almost become a nostalgic image now.
It really has. And Haidt's point is that kind of play, it's not just fun and games. It's actually essential for kids to develop all sorts of crucial skills. Social skills, resilience, that feeling of being in control of their own actions.
Yeah, makes sense. They're learning how to navigate the world on their own terms. And then the phone-based childhood, well, it seems pretty self-explanatory, but what are some of the nuances Haidt highlights beyond just, the device itself?
Right. It's not just about making calls. It's about everything kids are doing on their phones and computers. Social media, video games, endless scrolling, you name it. He's concerned about the sheer amount of time kids spend in these digital worlds and how it often comes at the expense of those real-world experiences we were just talking about.
It's like they're living more in their virtual worlds than in the actual world.
And he uses this striking analogy. It's like giving infants iPads with movies about walking, but they're so captivated by the movies that they never actually learn to walk themselves.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So how does he connect all of this to the rise in mental health issues among young people? What kind of data is he looking at?
He brings up some really compelling data. especially from the period after 2012. He points to a pretty dramatic and sudden increase in reported rates of major depressive episodes among U.S. teens.
Okay, so where is he getting that information?
He's using data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, which is a pretty large-scale survey, so it's a decent indicator of trends.
Got it. So what does this data actually show?
It shows this really clear hockey stick shape on the graph, and it's especially pronounced among girls. By 2020, 1 in 4 American teen girls reported having a major depressive episode in the past year.
1 in 4, that's a huge number. That's really alarming. And he sees 2012 as this key inflection point. What happened around that time that could explain such a big shift?
It's right around when smartphones and social media really took off among teenagers. Like, I remember getting my first smartphone around then, and it was a game changer. So the shift started earlier, but Haidt argues that 2010 to 2015 was this crucial period where things really accelerated.
Okay, so think back to 2013. The daily life of a teenager with a smartphone was just completely different from even just a few years earlier when they might have just had a basic cell phone.
Exactly. And this sudden spike in mental health issues, it aligns almost perfectly with the timeline of smartphone adoption. It's hard to ignore that correlation.
Yeah, that's a strong point. And he also mentions that these increases are mainly in internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression. What does that tell us about what might be happening?
It's an important distinction, right? So internalizing disorders are characterized by distress that's felt primarily inwardly. So we're talking anxiety, fear, sadness, those sorts of things. People with these disorders often tend to ruminate a lot, withdraw socially.
They turn inward.
Right, exactly. And Haidt's suggesting that the shift away from real-world social engagement and towards these more solitary or virtual interactions on phones, well, that could be contributing to this inward turn.
It's interesting because the common narrative around social media is that it connects people, but Haidt seems to be suggesting it might actually be doing the opposite, at least when it comes to those deeper, more meaningful connections.
Right. And he makes this distinction between the synchronous face-to-face interactions that are so crucial for developing social skills, like learning to read nonverbal cues, taking turns in a conversation, and the asynchronous, often performative nature of online interaction.
I see what you mean. It's like putting on a show online
Yeah.
versus that raw, unfiltered interaction you get in person.
Exactly. And he argues that even though social media might offer this high quantity of interactions, the quality can be much lower, which can actually leave people feeling more isolated, even though they're constantly connected.
It's like that saying, a mile wide and an inch deep.
Exactly. And then he gets into this really interesting point about how social media might be influencing how kids learn about the world.
Yeah.
It's like they're looking more to online figures than their immediate communities for guidance.
That's a really interesting point. He talks about conformist bias and prestige bias, right?
Yes, exactly. These are innate learning tendencies we all have, especially as kids. So conformist bias is basically our tendency to copy what's common. You see a bunch of people doing something, you're more likely to do it too.
Like those viral trends on TikTok, right?
Exactly. And prestige bias is our tendency to imitate people who seem successful. We look up to them, we want to be like them.
And so he's saying that social media platforms, which are designed to keep us engaged, they actually amplify the influence of these, well, often questionable online figures.
Yes, and that can sometimes overshadow the values and norms that kids are learning in their families and communities.
Yeah.
It's like there's this whole other set of influencers shaping their worldview.
Which might not always be the best influence.
Right, and he points out that adolescence, that period when kids are figuring out who they are and what they believe, that might be a particularly sensitive time for this kind of cultural learning. And unfortunately, that's also the time when their phone use and their online social lives are just exploding.
It's like a perfect storm. So we've talked about the digital side of things, but another key part of Haidt's argument is this idea of increased overprotection in the real world. How does that fit into this picture of the anxious generation?
Right. So alongside the rise of the phone-based childhood, Haidt argues that there's been this trend toward overprotecting kids in their physical environments. It's well-intentioned, but he argues it's ultimately harmful.
So we're talking about things like not letting kids play outside unsupervised, not letting them walk to school alone.
Exactly. And he points to this decline in unsupervised outdoor play that started in the 1980s, and he thinks it's partly fueled by parental anxieties, fears about kidnapping and other dangers, which are often amplified by the media.
Yeah, it's like we've become so risk averse as a society.
Absolutely. And so kids are spending less time independently navigating the real world and more time in these carefully controlled environments, both physically and digitally.
So less real-world exploration, more time online, and even when they are in the real world, there's often more adult supervision.
Precisely.
Mm.
And Haidt emphasizes how crucial free play is for kids. It lets them encounter those small-scale challenges, experience setbacks, learn to manage risks on their own. These experiences, he argues, are like an inoculation.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
It prepares them for bigger challenges they'll face later in life. But when we deprive them of those opportunities, it can actually hinder their development of resilience and self-confidence. He even talks about kids being anti-fragile, which basically means they benefit from some exposure to stressors, just like muscles grow stronger when you challenge them.
That makes sense. It's like if you're always shielded from any discomfort or risk, you might not develop the inner strength to deal with the inevitable difficulties of life. He even mentions those old, seemingly more dangerous playgrounds and how they actually helped kids learn about risk and their own limits.
Yes. He contrasts those older playgrounds with the overly sanitized ones we often see today. Kids used to have more opportunities for risky play, climbing higher, swinging faster, and they learned to manage their bodies and assess danger through direct experience.
It's like they were building that anti-fragility you were talking about.
Exactly. And he quotes a play researcher who says the goal should be to keep kids as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. Haidt argues that we've swung too far in the direction of trying to eliminate all risk, which has unintended negative consequences for kids.
So it's not about being reckless, but about finding that balance.
Right, that sweet spot between safety and freedom. And then he gets into this idea of discover mode and defend mode in the brain. It's a really interesting way of looking at how our environments shape our thinking.
Can you explain that a bit more? I think it's a really key concept in understanding his argument.
Absolutely. So discover mode, which he links to a play-based childhood, is when the brain is oriented towards exploring, learning, and actively engaging with the world. It's like being curious, seeking out new experiences, taking risks. And there's a system in the brain, the behavioral activation system, or BAS, that's active in this mode. It drives our curiosity and that sense of seeking out rewards.
Okay, so it's like being in that playful, exploratory mindset.
Exactly. And then there's defend mode, which kicks in when we perceive threats. And this is where the behavioral inhibition system, or BIS, becomes dominant. It leads to anxiety, withdrawal, and a focus on safety.
So it's like that fight or flight response.
Right. And Haidt argues that the combination of reduced real-world exploration and the constant stimulation of the online world is pushing young people to be in defend mode more often.
Because the online world can feel pretty threatening at times with all this social comparison and the pressure to present a perfect image.
Absolutely. And so the irony is that by trying to protect kids from all these real-world dangers, we might actually be making them more anxious because they haven't developed the internal resources to cope with uncertainty and challenges.
It's like they're not getting that inoculation we were talking about.
Exactly. And he even points to the rise in self-reported disabilities among college freshmen as a possible indicator of this shift towards defend mode.
Wow, so it's not just anxiety and depression, it's this broader sense of fragility.
Right. Now, he also gets into the specific harms of a phone-based childhood, and he outlines 4 foundational issues: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
Okay, let's unpack each of those a little bit.
Sure. So we've already touched on social deprivation, that lack of face-to-face interaction and the potentially shallower connections formed online. Haidt cites data showing a significant decline in the number of teens who meet up with their friends almost every day outside of school.
And that decline really started to take off around the same time smartphones became ubiquitous.
Exactly. And so kids are missing out on those crucial opportunities to develop their social skills and build strong relationships. And then there's sleep deprivation, which is already a big problem for teenagers because of their natural sleep-wake cycles.
Their circadian rhythms are different, right? They naturally stay up later and sleep in later.
Exactly. But smartphones make this problem even worse. The blue light emitted from screens can interfere with melatonin production, which is the hormone that regulates sleep. And then, of course, there's the temptation to stay up late, scrolling through social media, responding to messages.
Right, that FOMO, fear of missing out.
Exactly. So they end up going to bed later, but then they still have to get up early for school. So they're chronically sleep deprived, which has all these negative consequences for their concentration, learning, mood, even their physical health.
I can definitely relate to that. Even as an adult, if I don't get enough sleep, I'm just not functioning at my best. And then there's attention fragmentation, which is something I think a lot of us struggle with in this age of constant distraction.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
And for teenagers who've grown up with these devices that are designed to grab their attention, it's even more challenging. Haidt argues that the constant barrage of notifications, from social media, messaging apps, news alerts, it actually trains the brain to have a very short attention span.
You get used to that constant switching, and it becomes hard to focus on one thing for an extended period.
Exactly. And this can affect their ability to learn, to think deeply, to engage in those activities that require sustained attention. He actually likens smartphones to kryptonite for attention.
It's a great analogy. It's like it weakens our superpower of focus.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the issue of addiction. We hear a lot about social media addiction, video game addiction.
Right, it's becoming more and more recognized as a real problem.
Absolutely. And Haidt draws these parallels between how these platforms are designed and the techniques that are used by slot machines to keep people hooked. You know, that unpredictable reward, that endless scroll, that feeling of FOMO, it's all designed to trigger those dopamine hits and create those compulsive usage patterns.
So it's like they're designed to be addictive.
Right. And he cites research that shows people actually experience withdrawal symptoms, like anxiety and irritability, when they're forced to take a break from these platforms. And then he gets into how some of these tech companies, like Facebook, have actually used behavioral science principles to maximize user engagement.
Which basically means they're making their platforms more habit-forming.
Exactly. And Haidt is concerned about the impact of these addictive technologies on young, developing brains. He also explores some counter-arguments, like maybe these increases in anxiety and depression are just because there's more awareness about mental health, or maybe kids are just more willing to talk about it now.
That's a fair point.
But he presents evidence suggesting that the increases are likely reflecting a genuine decline in well-being. It's not just about reporting bias. He also considers whether other societal factors, like economic downturns or climate change, might be driving this anxiety.
So is he saying those things aren't playing a role at all?
Well, he acknowledges that they're legitimate concerns, but he argues that the timing doesn't quite fit with the sudden spike in mental illness after 2012. He points out that millennials, who lived through 9/11 and the global financial crisis, they didn't show this same rapid increase in mental health problems during their adolescence.
That's a really interesting point.
Right. And he also suggests that historically, when societies face shared threats, it often leads to more social cohesion, not widespread depression. So his argument is that the feeling of isolation and disconnection fostered by this great rewiring, that's a more significant factor here.
It's like we're all connected online, but we're actually more disconnected than ever.
Right. And then the book also explores why these trends might be affecting girls and boys somewhat differently.
I'm curious about that. What are some of the differences he highlights?
So he suggests that social media might be having a more pronounced negative impact on girls, and he attributes that to things like increased social comparison, especially around appearance, and the amplified experience of cyberbullying.
Yeah, those things can be really brutal online.
Absolutely. And then there's this constant pressure to present a flawless online persona, which can take a toll on self-esteem and mental health.
It's like you're constantly comparing yourself to these idealized versions of people.
Exactly. And he also talks about how emotions can spread very quickly within social networks, which might be amplifying feelings of anxiety and distress among girls.
It's like one person's bad mood can quickly become everyone's bad mood. And what about boys? How is this rewiring affecting them?
For boys, Haidt focuses more on the allure of the virtual world, especially video games, and how that might be contributing to a decrease in real-world opportunities for agency and connection.
So while girls might be struggling more with social comparison and cyberbullying, boys might be withdrawing more into these virtual worlds.
Right, and it's not that video games are inherently bad. They can offer a sense of accomplishment, a sense of community. But Haidt questions whether they provide the same quality of social development and real-world agency that comes from in-person interactions and independent exploration.
It's like they're getting their needs met virtually, but it's not necessarily translating to the real world.
Right, and he's concerned about this trend of boys becoming less engaged in school, less interested in real-world activities. It's like they're retreating into these virtual worlds.
So it's a complex issue with lots of different angles. It sounds like the anxious generation provides a really thorough and thought-provoking analysis. What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners today?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we need to be more aware of the profound impact our digital world is having on young people. It's not just about convenience and entertainment. It's shaping how their brains are developing, how they're learning to interact with the world, how they see themselves.
It's easy to dismiss it as just kids being kids, but the data Haidt presents is pretty compelling. And it's not just about pointing fingers and blaming technology either. He offers a lot of potential solutions, things that parents, educators, policymakers, even tech companies themselves can do to mitigate these harms.
Right? It's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot we can do to help young people navigate this new world in a healthier way.
Exactly. And the first step is simply becoming more aware of the issue. So if you're interested in learning more, we highly recommend picking up The Anxious Generation. It's a fascinating read. And for you, the learner, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights and maybe even a few aha moments. If you enjoyed this summary, make sure to follow Bookish Dives for more daily book summaries.
We're always exploring new ideas, and we'd love for you to join us on the journey.
Exactly. Until then, keep learning and keep questioning. And here's a final thought to ponder. If our brains are being rewired by these technological shifts during childhood and adolescence, what does that mean for the future of human connection, attention, and even our understanding of what it means to be human? It's a big question, but one worth thinking about.